4:33 p.m. Pacific time.
Okay, so I'll go ahead with the roll call then. Is Jeff Alves here? Oh, he's just connecting. We'll come back to him. Amy Armsby,
Present.
Sue Crane,
Here.
Sarah Dowery.
Present.
Okay, great. Eric Doyle said he'd be here about 4:40. Bill Kelly,
Here.
Ann Koff-Sill,
Here.
Al Sill,
Here.
Nicholas Targ, Bob Turcott,
Here.
Janie Ward,
Here.
Sarah Warnikoff,
Here.
Helen Walter,
Here. Thank you.
Chair Jocelyn Swisher.
Here.
And I wanted to introduce Andrew Pierce. He's the new appointment from the Race and Equity Committee. So welcome, Andrew. And I think I saw you. Yes. So we'll reflect in the record that you're here. And then,
I'm here.
Great. And then Jeff, I called your name just as you were connecting for the record.
Okay, I'm here.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So I guess in terms of oral communications, I'm going to just read from the agenda that we've got. People wishing to address the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee on any subject not on the agenda may do so now. Please note, however, that the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee is not able to undertake extended discussion or action tonight on items not on the agenda. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes per person. So we're actually going to use a timer to time comments. Okay. Does anybody-
Unfortunately, yeah, my apologies through the chair. We had the timer all working, but it didn't work just now as we were launching the meeting. So our apologies, staff apologies for that. So we can time comments, I can time comments for you and just indicate when we're out of time, if you would like me to do that, or what would you like us to do?
Yeah, I think let's do that, because I think getting into the practice would be a good idea. And then next meeting, we'll shoot for having a working timer. Okay, so any members of the public that want to address the committee on items not on the agenda, you can raise your hand using the little yellow hands.
So if you'd like me to go ahead, I'll call on the first one that I see is Monica Cheney.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for letting me talk during your subcommittee meeting. And thank you for all of your efforts in volunteering on this committee. I'm sure it's often a bit of a thankless job. And in fact, I wanted to be on this committee. So I should preface my comments, which I will try to speed through, by saying I was a bit disenchanted that what I feel is a bit of a minority viewpoint was not permitted to be on the committee. Apparently, if you had a viewpoint that involved seeking to appeal our RHNA numbers, that was sort of not an acceptable position. At least that's what I was told. So that sort of gets me to my first comment, which is we did have a subcommittee on below market rate housing just shy of 10 years ago. And it was on the heels of a rather, shall we say, bumpy effort by the town council to purchase 900 Portola Road. And so in the aftermath of that, there was an ad hoc committee that was created of citizens, sort of similar to this committee. And I read very carefully the recommendations that they made at that time. And they're in the town website. They're very easily accessible. And I just want to, emphasize that the very first thing they say is Portola Valley should seek to provide housing, but at the same time, we need to stick with our general plan and the sort of regulations we've come up with over the last half century. And so I just want to refer everybody to that document. I think, in a way, this is sort of like recreating the work of of a committee that did exist and I think put forth some really helpful recommendations that took a long time and a lot of discussion, and I think they're very useful. I also do want to say that I've asked a few times over the last decade for the council to commission an opinion letter from our legal counsel to actually explain both to the council and to the community at large, and that's really important. I think the community at large deserves to hear this, what exactly we are legally obligated to do as a town. You know, these RHNA numbers kind of get batted about, and I think there's a lot of misconception in the public, at least, and perhaps on the council or elsewhere, about really what a town must do, because it is really largely a planning obligation. I think
Monica,
some
you're
people-
at just about 2 minutes now.
Okay, well, some people think we actually must ensure that those units get built. And I would posit that is not the case. Lastly, I'd like to refer to a letter from council members Hughes and Richards dated August 23rd, sent to the California Department of Insurance, CAL FIRE, and the Housing and Development Department, specifically stating that they're very concerned that if we go forward with 253 units, we put ourselves at increased fire danger and that people will not be able to get insured. Notably, that's already happening. So I'm very concerned about insurance and frankly, the liability of the town if we build high density in certain fire regions in the town, high fire risk region. So I will cut myself off. I didn't quite finish, but there you are. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Monica. Any other comments from the public? Okay.
I have a
So,
question.
yeah,
May I? Every other town meeting that I'm aware of, the town council, planning commission, ASCC, allow 3 minutes for public comments. Monica raised some pretty substantive issues, and I'm wondering why 2 minutes was selected and whether we can increase that to 50% to 3 minutes so it's consistent with other public meetings.
yeah, I guess, you know, in the planning meeting for the agenda, we just felt that we've got so much work that we're going to be doing in the meetings today and going forward. So we wanted to try 2 minutes and sort of see how that works. We can certainly talk about it if it doesn't seem to be giving people enough time.
Okay, that struck
And
me
then
as an
just a
example.
reminder on Monica's comments, we're not in a position to be able to discuss them in this meeting. So.
Mhm. That struck me as an example of 2 minutes being too short.
Okay,
So we'll see how it goes.
Noted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
thank you. Helen?
Respectfully, some meetings, they'll limit people down to 1 minute. So I actually appreciate the 2 minute so I just wanted that logged. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move into the committee discussion part of the meeting. So we had a great discussion in the last meeting about the committee's values. I'm going to review that once again here and just come to an agreement on that, as well as committee decorum and what we're expecting for public comment part of the meeting. And then once we've agreed on a final version for those, we're going to include them in a document in the next meeting. So everybody can have that. And I actually would love to keep including in the packets going forward, if that's possible. Okay, so first, do we have the slides? For
Yeah,
people?
Jocelyn, I'm just gonna pull that up for you.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. Awesome. Thanks to Adrian's work on this. We've got some nice slides. Okay, so on this first one,
Pardon me.
I just wanted to give a reminder about the committee's charge that, that we're a part of. Town Council has directed the Ad Hoc Housing Element Committee to develop a housing element that lays out the town's plan for housing over an 8-year cycle. So my understanding is it's a plan that we're putting forth. It's not a commitment to building all the housing in the plan. And then this must comply with state law and will be certified by the Housing and Community Development, HCD, which is a state agency. The committee will develop a housing element that reflects the town values and goals and also incorporates best possible planning for safety considerations. So that's our charge. Now, in terms of the values, this is kind of the discussion part that we'll get to. So this was a recap from our last meeting. We had talked about the foundation for all our discussion and decisions. It comes from the town values and town goals stated in the general plan. So these ones that are laid out here are examples: encourage equity, diversity, and inclusivity among residents. The next one, maintaining the town as a family-oriented residential community. And then the third one, preserving and enhancing the town's natural features and open space. So we have here being mindful of the rural character. So I guess I wanted to just ask the committee, are there any other values that you feel we need to represent here? Or does that kind of cover it for you? Bob?
Yeah, it seems to me that safety is conspicuous by its absence here. Maybe, you know, there's a difference of opinion about whether that would be considered a value, but certainly that's something that should be central to our planning, I think.
Mm-hmm. I don't see why we couldn't have number 4, upholding safety considerations per town goals and guidelines, whatever. Are you cool with that, Laura, Adrian?
Yeah, certainly. I'm taking notes actually, so I'll make sure that we get all this down.
Okay, cool. Yes, Helen.
I actually am going to not say anything. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. Anybody else have any adds they want to make on the values or edits? Okay, I'm not seeing no hands. I'm not scrolling either. So I'm assuming that they pop up to the top of the list if there's a hand. Anybody who knows?
No,
about it?
I'm gonna make a comment, and I don't know if this is overkill, but it comes to mind per Monica's comments at the outset. I do think, you know, in terms of the committee's charge, I agree that there's confusion about what the charge of the committee is sometimes out in the public, and that the charge is definitely to create an element that complies with the state law, i.e. RENA. I don't know if we want to add that in there. And that is a requirement of what, you know, that is the objective of what this committee is working on. And I think the charge also is to plan for it, not build it. I agree that there's confusion on that. So, you know, if there's others that agree, there might be ways to refine, you know, number 1 or 2 to add that level of detail. Is just a thought.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that seems reasonable to me. I think we use the word certified. Yeah, I mean, we could put in plan and not build, something like that, just to be very specific.
I like the idea of adding RENA in there too, just so it's clear to people. I mean, complies with state law, makes it sound like don't do anything illegal. But, you know, where state law is RENA, that's the hard part, right?
Okay, those edits sound something that makes sense to me. All right, Nicholas?
Yeah, one of the values is called out in the general plan is also small government. And I'd like to add that as a item here as well. On the committee's values, and it may also make sense just to leave that open and to allow us to give some thought and to look at the general plan to make sure that our values are those which are properly reflected in the GP. So for example, issues of sustainability would come to mind, and it's one of these is you need to say what are the values. We can do it in an ad hoc manner, but you know, we have a guiding document as well that we think would want to reference back to.
Yeah, I mean, we could make a footnote as, you know, as covered in the town's values and goals.
Yeah.
Um,
And similarly, I don't know if the committee's values are also process values of inclusiveness of points of view, civility and discussion.
We're actually going to get to that in just 1 second. We've got the second slide, which touches on all of that. So if you don't mind holding those questions for that. But okay, so I think, so I've heard suggestions to include small government, sustainability, which are other important values in Portola Valley, making a footnote to call out the general plan and that these are, you know, coming from that. Nicholas, did you have anything else?
Not at this time.
Okay, so maybe if we could go to the next slide. So here's what we put together for just thinking about how kind of agreements we want to make on how our committee works together in these meetings. So the first one is to actively listen and be curious. We really want to make sure that we're considerate of all of our fellow members on the team, avoid interruptions, and ensure that people feel heard and understood. Also encourage you all to ask clarifying questions if you don't understand a point. Or if you require a speaker to provide more detail, you could clarify the point, you can do that too. You know, really, we want to have a supportive, kind of inclusive environment while we're meeting. Number 2, want to encourage everybody to assume positive intent. We're all volunteering, which is awesome, and we're all trying our best to be thoughtful and well considered in our decisions for housing in the town. Third one, you know, this is respect differences. We're lucky that we've got a committee with a range of people with really varying life experiences and worldviews. So, you know, really, we all bring valuable insight to the table, even if we don't agree with each other on every single thing. So just want to remind everybody to be respectful of each other's differences and come to every meeting with an open mind and ready to learn from each other. Number 4, we want to ensure real orderly and productive discussion. So if you could please refrain from interrupting, raise your virtual hand when we're doing these online meetings. That'll make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak who wants to. Number 5, seeking consensus. So when we're charged with making a decision, really our goal is to all work together to reach consensus. We may start a discussion at opposite ends of a given topic, but hopefully through, you know, just being open-minded and cooperating, we can get together on decisions that we can all live with and be happy with and support. And then I just want to say, I just hope that we all enjoy this process and have fun working together. We're going to be working together over the next year, and I think those are important goals for us. Okay, so did anybody have any questions, comments on these ideas here? All right, super.
They're great. Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Okay, next slide, last slide for this section. Thank you, Adrian. So this is on public comment. What we want to say here is, you know, the public participation is absolutely vital to this whole process. And that our committee discussions and decision-making will be a lot richer and more representative of what people in our community believe if we receive the public input. So we encourage participation in this open committee process. And we encourage people to comment, make suggestions, and feel welcome to share and express their views. Okay, number 2, all speakers treated with respect. So we all know how much courage it takes to speak up in front of a public forum. And we appreciate and respect all the community members who show up to participate. We want to thank them and encourage and ongoing participation. All right, number 3. So here, we've got packed agendas, and I know our town team kind of understands what our roadmap is going forward, and we've got a lot to chunk through over the next year. So we really appreciate if you could keep your comments on agenda topics. And we are going to try this 2-minute timer to see how that works. We can always adjust it if we need to down the road. That's really that. Okay. Anything else on public comments? Are we all in agreement on this? Super. All right, thank you. So we can move on to the next section, number 2.
Okay, just give me a second. I'm gonna pull that slideshow up. Can everybody see that okay? Right. And just to note it, last time my microphone wasn't working so well, and I know some of my presentation wasn't heard. So I have a new one, and I hope everybody can hear me really well. But if not, please don't hesitate to interrupt me and let me know, because I don't want anybody to miss anything. All right, so here we go. So these next few slides, I'm going to take the committee through an overview of the organization and evaluation of the existing housing element that covers this outgoing housing element period of 2015 to 2022. So 2 main topics I'm going to go over. Firstly, we're going to briefly review the format and template of the existing housing element and flag some of the ways in which the town's updated housing element may look a little bit different. And secondly, we'll consider the town's high-level performance on the existing housing element covering years 2015 to 2022. And these will be highlights pulled directly from your staff memo in the meeting packet. So hopefully committee members did have a chance to review the town's existing housing element. The existing element is organized into sections covering housing needs and trends, constraints analysis, evaluation of past performance, policies and programs, and a sites inventory. The town's existing housing element also integrates into the general plan and follows the same format and cadence of other general plan elements, in that the content is expressed in short statements or bullet points, with each bullet point of content labeled according to a 4-digit numbering system. In actuality, a housing element is a rather exceptional element compared to other general plan elements, in that it's a lengthy and comprehensive document that should be able to function as a standalone document. Of course, as we discussed in our first committee meeting, the housing element must be consistent with the town's general plan goals, priorities, and policies. However, to accommodate the California Department of Housing and Community Development's requirements for increased rigor and analysis in this upcoming housing element cycle, which is more demanding than over past housing element cycles, staff do expect that this housing element might be organized in a more longer form narrative format, and will vary to some degree from the format of the rest of the general plan. Staff also expect the draft housing element update to contain more supportive material over past cycles, and materials such as tables, maps, town land use images, and illustrative charts and graphics where appropriate. So the following slides will draw from the staff memo in your meeting packets, where we've taken a first crack at evaluating the town's past performance on the existing housing element. So the analysis was conducted by one of the town's housing element update consultants, 21 Elements, in partnership with staff. So as mentioned on the previous slide, an assessment of past performance is a required section of the updated housing element for this next cycle. So staff wanted to familiarize the committee with the strides we've made in planning for housing and the challenges and opportunities that still lay ahead. So first things first, accomplishments. The town's ADU production has ramped up over this past 8-year cycle, in part owing to a permissive ADU ordinance that was first adopted in 2019. The ordinance was updated in 2021 in response to changes in state law, and homeowners can now more easily add ADUs to their property. Many of these units are helping to create new rental housing in existing neighborhoods. ADU production has been very effective in satisfying the town's previous 64-unit RHNA requirement. Both the ADU ordinance adoption and update processes included comprehensive public outreach to ensure that the broader community could participate in the process and understand the changes. So next, the affiliated housing program. It allows for multifamily employee housing on land zoned for institutional uses. Highlights here include the Priory School, which has been part of our community for decades, who are currently constructing 6 new units for staff. Sequoia Senior Living are also considering the feasibility of adding new units for their employees, residents, and others. Aside from the Priory and the Sequoias, Town Council has already voted to add the Ladera Community Church as an affiliated housing partner, along with the town itself. Regarding the town as an affiliated partner, an ad hoc town-owned property committee was previously formed and led by the town manager. That committee reviewed existing town-owned land to explore its potential for employee housing. From that committee's efforts, a site at Town Center has been identified for a potential future housing project. And finally, over the past 8 years, the community has come together to understand its housing needs. Portola Valley was one of the first jurisdictions to partner with the Homes for All program, a San Mateo collaborative initiative working to increase housing diversity, which in turn set off a series of conversations around the importance of housing in our community. Another example is the town's progressive approach to ADU construction. Overall, there's a strong sense that this is a community that understands that yes, there are state laws compelling us to plan for increasing our housing capacity. But even more, this is a community that has taken on challenging conversations to balance housing priorities. So we know we have challenges ahead. Portola Valley is a town that is deeply proud of its rural character and plentiful open space. And one of the challenges inherent in this housing element update is balancing the preservation of this identity with the housing needs of those who reside here and will in the future. We need to think critically about how to meet our future housing needs. Our community has historically been comprised of single-family homes, and we don't have land zoned for mixed use or multifamily use. This creates an obvious challenge for accommodating the town's future housing needs, especially those in lower income categories. We also know that we face environmental, hazard, and infrastructure constraints. One of these is the San Andreas Fault, which poses considerable seismic risk. A lot of our properties also have difficult topographies and steep slopes. This creates challenges for housing and infrastructure construction. New developments also face very expensive infrastructure costs. And finally, the town faces fire risk. The town is located in a wildland urban interface with limited access in and out of the community. There are also areas of the town that cannot be intensified because of access requirements by the fire district. We must ensure that our housing element update carefully considers these risks, as the safety of all residents, new and future, is paramount. And lastly, we have some opportunities. ADUs will again be a major strategy in this next housing element cycle. We know we need to fine-tune our assumptions on the affordability of new ADU units and projections. I do want to emphasize that staff will be bringing an ADU deep dive to committee members at a meeting date in the near future, so that is coming. We're just touching on it today at a high level, but this topic will be coming back to you for comprehensive discussion. Next is the town's affiliated housing program. So this program has awakened interest among other partners who want to join the program and build more housing on their land. As mentioned, this includes Ladera Community Church and the town itself. Finally, regarding supportive housing, a local family is interested in developing a supportive housing project, which could serve as a model for independent living with assistance for adults with disabilities. These last two programs show particular promise for helping the town plan for required unit numbers at the lower income levels. So we have had great successes and further opportunities to build upon those successes as we get deeper into this housing element update. So that's it for this presentation, and of course, staff welcome any questions from the committee and the public as well.
I have a couple questions. This is Eric Doyle. Can you go back to your first slide?
Very first.
The first one where it just listed out accomplishments. There you go. No, second slide, sorry.
Yeah.
I'd love to just know, ADUs have ramped up. Okay, how many units have we created or have been, like in our situation, we converted an existing playroom into an ADU and then leased it to a young woman who's affiliated with one of the local horse programs. So how many have actually been created, and then how many have gone, if we can find this out, it would be great to know how many have actually gone to third-party source, kind of rental people versus did they go to a family member? So I just am really curious about if they have ramped up, how many units, and actually where have those units gone in terms of who is the end user for them. And then on the second bullet point, affiliated housing program is linking jobs and housing in strategic sites. That's just music to my ears. Can we identify the different sites that have been identified by that ad hoc group and the number of units each site could potentially create? And then the third point is just, I get the feeling on the people that have been knocking on my door that there's a community that's rallying around and understanding the housing needs, and there's also another group that's saying, it's great that we need housing, but let's make sure that it gets into somebody else's town and not ours. So those are just my 3 comments on that first sheet.
Through the chair, would you like me to try to answer those generally? I'm sorry, you were muted, but I think you said yes. Yes, okay. So ADUs have ramped up. We will bring the numbers back to you at an upcoming meeting. But just to kind of get a sense of the order of magnitude, we're talking about 6 ADUs per year was the previous town goal. And then having more like 10 ADUs per year has been a kind of a more recent goal. And then we probably have some higher numbers this year, but we're still putting that information together. So that gives you a sense of the order of magnitude we're talking about, but we'll bring back some detailed information to you in one of the next 2 meetings when we talk about ADUs. In terms of the end users of ADUs, we do not know for sure. The town has not had a program to survey its ADU owners in the past. Some communities do that, and we may wish to do that. So that will be another topic that we'll be talking about. And then in terms of the sites and the number of units, we'll be having detailed discussion about the sites that we have in town that may work for housing production and how many units we think are possible to be built on those sites. So those are all upcoming topics that we're going to talk about. I think the question was related to the housing on town-owned property. So yes, that will definitely be covered. And then the discussion about affiliated housing will take a little bit different shape since that is an existing program that we'll be talking about if it continues, how it continues, and how it may change in the future.
Great, thanks for that. And I would just assume, with only 6 to 10 being created over the 6 being created over the last few years, I mean, that's as easy almost as a phone call, just to say to the person, are you, who's renting that from you? It might be an easy thing to, get the information there. And then just in general, on the sites that you've identified, in terms of magnitude, are we talking 50 to 60 units? Kind of what's been identified and what's the magnitude of the potential units on those sites?
Well, the Housing on Town-Owned Property Committee went through a lengthy process of trying to figure out what some of the obstacles were. And actually one of our committee members here, Nicholas Targ, served on that committee. And we'll get into the details of that. The order of magnitude for the one site that the council said this is a good potential site to go forward with is the one on Town Center property, which is, we refer to it as the substation property. It's across the field from the town hall building. And in terms of the number of units, very small, like 6 or 8 or something like that.
Okay. Anne, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first one is on the Ladera Church housing affiliated housing. I was surprised. Would they count in arena numbers? I thought they were outside the town proper.
The church is outside of the town, but they own a property that's inside the town limits, immediately adjacent to the church. So they are literally on the town limit.
I
And
didn't
so
appreciate that.
It's that empty
Wow.
parcel that they're interested in developing for housing.
Oh, good for us. Okay. And then this is a little stretched from your topic, but it's in the news, so it's on my mind. The governor signed this SB 9 and 10 that allows people, I think, to subdivide their lots and then build two things. Are we allowed to capture those units in RENA? Then we'd be done, right? Probably not.
We probably would not be done from that. And so if those of you that may not be aware, the governor signed SB 9 and 10 late last week. We just had a meeting this morning regionally of planning directors, planners, attorneys to hear from some leaders in our profession about what this may mean. There's going to be still a lot of interpretation of these laws and a lot of discussion about how they're going to be implemented. And there will be crossover with this committee's work. So we'll be preparing materials and distributing them to you. So if we can, before the next meeting, if we can come up with good summary information, we'll provide that over email and post it to the town's website as well. But we're in the very early stages of understanding what this law actually means and how it applies to the housing element work.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Anne. Okay, Helen, you have a question, comment?
I do. I have quite a few questions. Sorry about that. A couple of things from that report that I wanted to go through. Question about ADU counting towards the ABAG RENA requirements. Someone told me at one point, and I just want to clarify, I don't think this is accurate. They told me that somehow ADUs get extra credit somehow. So that's one of my questions. I don't think that's accurate, but I wanted to verify with you all. I also, because ADUs are privately and not owned and not deed restricted, I am assuming that they do not count towards our lower income housing requirements. So I wanted to check on that. Want me to keep going? I have multiple questions.
Do you want to address those two, Laura?
Yeah. So ADUs do not count as extra or something special. If they are a net new unit, then they count towards our RENA, just like any other kind of unit in terms of just the sheer number of units. It's true that ADUs are private and typically not deed restricted. So there's very few cases where there may be some in other communities, other cities and towns where there may be some deed restricted ADU. But it's pretty uncommon. It might be something we talk about when we get into ADUs more deeply in the next 2 months. But ADUs do count towards the lower income categories according to a formula and a process that the town has been using. And we'll be talking about that in either October or November. So we're going to get pretty deeply into that. And I will explain at that time what our regional group 21 Elements is doing to prepare for the next round of ADU affordability assignments.
Great, thank you. Okay, next question. When you come back with the numbers of ADU, I'd love to see the bedroom breakdown. You know, the 1,200 square foot, I am concerned about the 1,200 square foot limitation under SB 9. People can now get around it by splitting their lots potentially. But I have found that 1,200 is not very family friendly. So I did want to, you know, talking to multiple over 10 architects trying to come in at a 3-bedroom size ADU for a family is very tricky. So I'd love to get the breakdown of what's been built in town for, you know, how many 1-bedrooms we've gotten, 2 bedrooms, etc., if possible. Is the Hawthorne property, my understanding is they might be applying for multifamily housing over there. Was that the potential the development, you said a private family, some families were trying to work on a proposal. Is that the proposal, or is the Hawthorne's proposal not even part of this discussion at this point?
Well, Hawthorne's proposal is not part of this discussion at this point.
Okay,
We did some early work with them with Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space to see if MROSD, I'm sorry, if there was some work that we could do together to see if that site could be reused. But that project didn't go anywhere beyond pre-application stage.
great. Okay, thank you. Also under in the housing element, could you please let me know when I look at the slope of what is considered buildable? I don't have that background. What is considered buildable when we're talking about slope? The maps that were included, it was hard for me to understand that.
Well, that's an excellent question. We'll have to get into this day and age. You can build on a very steep slope. It doesn't mean it's a great idea. There's an engineering solution for most everything, but there are potential safety implications and potential design and aesthetic implications as well on building on steep slopes. So I think we'll have to think about that further. So thanks for that question and comment.
Okay. I also am curious, and again, this is probably, I'm putting the horse before the cart potentially, our water allocation looking like from Bosca? I don't know what our Portola Valley's water rights. I know that, and because people have asked about water and expansion, and so if potentially we can find that out for build out possibilities, that would be great for down the road.
Great. Noted.
Thank you. I know that's putting the horse before the cart.
On that one, this is Cara Silver, the town attorney. Just so you know, we're not part of Bosqua. We're part of Cal Water. And so we're not governed by the Bosqua allocation.
Great, thank you. But okay, I'd still love to know what our water right allocation is. So that'd be great. Thank you. What maps is the town currently using to decide fire zones? In the housing element, I saw 2008, but it was super hard to read the differences in the housing element. So I would appreciate just knowing what maps are currently being used. And that's my last question. Sorry to slam you guys with questions.
We'll be supplying more information. CAR's office, the town attorney's office, and planning staff and the town manager's office have put together a fair amount of materials up to this point related to the different maps and what applies where. So we'll be providing that. And then we're also working with our housing element and safety element consultants to bring further resources into the conversation. And so we're working on that right now and confirming what maps are available and what's been updated and what's the best practices.
Great. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate all of this. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thanks for all your questions. Bob, you're next. Go ahead.
Thank you. The good news is Helen covered some of my questions. Bad news is there's a lot more. So I apologize, but there's a lot of important stuff here. One question I had, actually, I think you covered that. I have a question about sort of the mechanics of town governance. In the staff report that was distributed, it indicated the town council would like to add additional partners to the affiliated housing program. I'm wondering, what's the mechanism by which that's communicated? Is it like a formal resolution, or does a town council member pick up the phone and talk to the town manager? I wonder if you could explain how that works.
There was an item before the town council to consider expanding the affiliated housing program. And at that time, the council indicated its interest in doing that. The technical steps to actually do that requires a general plan, which at the minimum requires a public hearing by the planning commission and a public hearing by the town council. So those formal steps have not taken place yet.
Okay, so the final step of the process is to vote on a resolution. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And there's some discussion about expanding the affiliated housing program. I'm wondering if partners are being considered that don't already have a presence in town.
Could you say more about that? I'm not sure I'm following.
A number of candidates for expanding the affiliated housing program were named. Ladera Community Church for one, the town itself for another, and then reference was made to, at least as I read it, that there were other partners that were under consideration. And so I'm wondering, are those partners property owners in town, or are communications happening with potential landowners that would buy property and then develop housing?
I'm not aware of any communications with people that do not already own property in the town.
Okay, all right. Would if companies say like Facebook or Google bought property and were interested in developing employee housing, would that fit within the affiliated housing program, or is the affiliated housing program really intended to address employment within the town?
I think the way that it's written out was intended to address employment of those existing institutions. So what form or shape the affiliated housing program may take in the future is appropriate subject matter for this committee through this process.
Okay, thank you. With respect to the town sponsored housing, is the idea that the town would do the development and operate it, or partner with a nonprofit, or how would that actually work?
It hasn't been decided. I think most likely from a practical point of view, it would need a partner in order to develop and operate it.
Okay. And regarding the inclusionary housing policy, I believe I read in the current housing element that the target is about 15% of units in a development would be designated for below market rate housing. Is that number about right? 15%?
Yes, 15% we have a current inclusionary housing requirement. And for some of you, some of this language and terminology is going to be new. So we'll be talking about this more as we move through. But it's a common requirement that cities and towns require a certain percentage of units to be made available for affordable housing. And that's usually called inclusionary housing. And so a lot of places have a requirement that's based on the number of units because they have multifamily housing in those communities. We have an existing inclusionary housing program that is based on subdivisions, and that's 15% of the lots in the subdivision. And you can either build that affordable housing or in some cases pay an in lieu fee instead of building that affordable housing.
Does our policy favor home ownership versus rental for the inclusionary housing policy, or is it sort of neutral on that?
I would have to check and see. I'm not sure off the top of my head. I think that it is neutral, but I think that that'll be a topic for additional discussion.
Okay. In the staff report, there's a section on challenges, and it mentioned, it named a number of, identified a number of challenges that we face in finding sites for development. And one of the things that wasn't mentioned that I was curious about is the legally defined open space that we have. Do you know, you might not have the hard data, but just generally, what's your intuition about what fraction of Portola Valley's area that represents? Is it like 20% of our area is a designated open space, or do you have any sense of that?
That's encumbered or legally designated, like through a conservation easement or open space easement?
Mm-hmm. The word development would not be possible.
I don't think we have that information. We have tried to think about what our past historic records include, and I don't think we could easily access that, but we'd have to think about it.
Okay. Another challenge that wasn't mentioned was insurability, and our mayor has mentioned more than once that she has lost her insurance twice, and I know all of us know people that have faced that or really dramatic increases. How should we think about, or should we think about insurability as an issue as we think about new development? Is that something that will be clarified as we go through the process, or?
This is a challenging one in terms of how it intersects with this committee's work. We're trying to be very practical. in this committee and come up with a plan where we think, it can be achieved. But there has to be some sort of boundaries or guardrails, and we can't take up every single topic. I think what we should do is stay informed in terms of there's a council subcommittee, and the letter was referenced earlier, I think, in the public comments. And so there's a council subcommittee working on some of the broader issues. And so maybe what staff can do is bring update to this committee on some of those broader issues. And then we can figure out how that intersects with this committee's work.
Okay. Related to that, of course, is wildfire hazard, and that was mentioned as one of the challenges. And it was mentioned that ADU development is excluded from certain parts of the town because of that. And I was wondering what your sense is about the, what fraction of Portola Valley's area is affected by that?
The current exclusion?
Mm-hmm.
We could estimate the number of parcels that are excluded. I don't have that number now, but if you're interested in that for our ADU discussion, we could see if we could do that.
And are we to think that area where ADUs are excluded represents the extent of the fire hazard, or do we consider other parts of Portola Valley as also being at elevated hazard?
Well, staff will provide consultant information, best practices, data, analytical tools, and then it's up to this committee to bring that information together and think about what your recommendations are as a committee about how those issues would be addressed.
Okay. Those are my main questions. Thank you.
Amy, why don't we go to you next?
Thanks. Really just, I think 3 questions. And the first is about terminology more than anything. So would the town site, if the town were to develop a site on town property, would that be considered affiliated housing? Or would that be one of the other programs?
I think that remains to be seen in its specifics, because the council hasn't given specific direction yet. I think it was initially, it's been sort of conceptualized as an affiliated housing project, but the details haven't been thought through or developed.
Got it. And then my next question is, has there been any discussion with the Portola Valley School District about some kind of affiliated partnership?
I do not want to speak out of turn on this one. I think that it's possible, but I don't know the extent of it. So maybe that could be something we could follow up on.
Okay. And then this is really just to hopefully, I don't know if it's helpful, but on page 69 of the housing element, there is a map that shows where second units are allowed, and it's quite extensive. If you look at the map of Portola Valley, I mean, I'm just eyeballing it, but ADUs don't seem to be restricted in a significant portion of the town. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really important observation, Amy. Thank you. The current zoning code, the municipal code, limits ADUs further than what the general plan describes.
I see.
And so that's from the last 2 updates from the ADU ordinance.
Great, thanks.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Any other questions, comments from the committee? Okay.
I just want to make one comment based on what you just said, Laura. So one thing for the committee to be aware of is that the last housing element that is linked, to the agenda today, when was that? That was from 2015. And so to the point that Laura, I just want to make a point of clarification to the point that Laura just mentioned, there's a whole variety of things that had happened since then. So basically what this committee, correct me if I'm wrong, Laura, is going to be doing is evaluating that housing element plus the progress that's been made since then. And then we go from there in terms of thinking. In other words, not everything that's currently in place is reflected in that past housing element. Just so people are aware.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely correct. So what we presented to you today was sort of the very high level of the things that have happened since our current housing element went into place in 2015. And then we'll kind of refine and continue that evaluation. And then eventually we'll have a draft of the housing element that this committee will look at, that will look at that evaluation. But we wanted to give this to you as kind of a baseline so that as you're going forward to talk about your next topics, you have this kind of basic high-level information.
Amy, do you have a follow-on question?
No, I'm sorry. I'm having a little technical issue, so I'm not able to unraise my hand. I will.
Okay, let me do that.
Thank you.
And then I'm gonna, if it's okay with everyone, I'm gonna we'll stop sharing Adrian's screen so people can see each other better.
Yeah, great. Hi, everybody. Okay, Andrew, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, I just wondered if the current ADU ordinance and housing element things, I was on that ad hoc committee 10 years ago that was mentioned before. We talked about ADUs a lot. Whether all of that is not preempted by AB 9, doesn't that set a whole bunch of different both rules allowing and exceptions that are going to preempt the local law?
So there will be changes to the local law from that recent legislation. We're still sorting out what it means and how it's going to be applied. So it may not directly impact ADUs significantly. It's more related to duplex and potential lot splits. But again, we'll be bringing back more information on that.
Okay.
Okay, great. Lots of good questions. From the public, are there any, is this a good time? Laura,
Through the
to-
chair, Sue has her hand up.
Yeah, Sue.
Yeah, I'm racking my brain. So to go back to the 1980s, when I was on the council. And I need someone to help me, but I remember that was the very first time that we heard from the state about supplying affordable housing in Portola Valley. Now, what I remember is, so it had to be that early. And I would ask Laura if it was that early, that was the first time we heard about affordable housing. And I remember George Mader saying, look, don't worry about it. We'll deal with ADUs. We'll encourage people to have them, and we'll be able to satisfy the state that way. We didn't change any of the regulations of how big, if they would get larger, but that's how we started. Laura, is that right in the history of affordable housing from the state, their mandate from the state?
I can't speak to whether it started in the 1980s. I can tell you that in the 1990s, there were regulations that started to come into play. What I think of as the first version of our kind of modern ADU requirements, I think are from 2003, when people first started to really think of ADUs kind of the way we do today. And then the state law has gotten progressively more strict and removed local control kind of consistently since then, in response to, the lack of housing for people in California. But there's been a series of many laws that have taken place around ADUs and other elements of housing.
That was the beginning for us. I know that. I remember sitting in a council meeting. If it wasn't the 80s, it was certainly the 90s and the late 90s, because it was George Mader, and it was his creativity that said start with ADUs. of course it went on, but it's just a memory that I have that I wanted to add to the conversation.
Thanks, Sue. It's good to have somebody with that history on our team.
Quick question on the topic that Sue just brought up. In addition to ADUs, has the town of Portola Valley, have we created any affordable, or how many affordable housing units have been created since those discussions, or have we only been creating units via ADUs?
The vast majority have been through ADUs. Examples outside of that would be at the Priory. They built units for their staff over the last 2 decades or so. Right now, they're in construction for 6 units on their site.
So other than the Priory creating, and that's just, those are affordable units specifically for their staff. As a town, we haven't created any affordable units other than ADUs yet.
I believe that's accurate, yes.
Okay. If our
Wait,
committee's done with questions,
wait.
are we? Yep, Sue?
Yeah, just going back again. So I'm just thinking about my role, my double role of being a member of the Sequoias, of living here at the Sequoias. So it's important to know exactly what Sequoias is doing and what they're thinking about. They're in the early stages of dealing with the town of what they would like, but I can see that it's important to have any intermediate thoughts from the Sequoias at this time, describing what they could possibly do and what they're thinking about, which I don't think has come to completion yet. And I feel as though I should feel responsible to tell this committee what I know is going on at the Sequoias. So I will be diligent in reporting that.
That would be great to get the intel. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna shift over to our public. Monica Cheney, you have your hand up.
Okay, so I'm gonna, I'm sorry, Monica, I'm sorry to interrupt you. So I'm gonna try to just use the timer here on my phone. So I'll give you a warning when we're at 2 minutes to wrap up.
Thanks so much. I have a question that, since we're on this topic, that I think Sue Crane brought up eloquently, which is, it seems that historically we've used some affiliated housing, the sites that have had affiliated housing on them. So for example, Priory, the number of units have been built for faculty, and the number of units has not been exceedingly large. It is very much in keeping with the sizing, massing, density, and other rules in our sort of general plan and related documents. And so I think, one of the questions I have is if, for example, we were to have, I don't know if it's 36 or 39 units on the Wedge property that Stanford owns, which would be apparently considered, if I'm understanding it correctly, affiliated housing rather than an inclusionary housing development. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, because I may be. But if we allow that on however many acres are available at the Wedge site that Stanford owns, what would be the equivalent number of units that would be permitted to be equitable on the Priory property or the Sequoias property? In other words, once you sort of unleash this change in rules for affiliated housing, what would be the number equivalent on other affiliated housing sites?
You want to comment, Laura?
Sorry. Okay, so first in regards to the Stanford faculty housing that's at the site that people refer to as the Wedge, that the way that they are pursuing that application is not as an affiliated housing project. They are doing it through the town's municipal code, our inclusionary housing requirements, inclusionary lot requirements, and state density bonus. And there's a lot of materials on the town's website now related to Stanford. There's a big list of questions and answered, kind of a really detailed FAQ. And so if you're interested in that, committee members and members of the public, that's a good place to go to read about that. And so it's portolavalley.net/projects. Will take you to the landing page to go to the different town projects. So that is a great resource on that. They have been an affiliated housing partner, meaning they've been identified in the housing element, but they did not pursue that approach as outlined in the housing element. They went with our code instead. I think Monica's question about kind of equivalency or what would be equitable for Sequoias or Priory or any other larger landowners is a really good question, because in the past, the affiliated housing partners of the Priory is the only one that's actually built these units. And the way that they did it was through approval of like a master plan that went through a conditional use permit process. And so if the affiliated housing program remains and potentially is expanded, then it would be appropriate to create more of a process and more standards, and so that there'd be stronger expectations about how affiliated housing would be developed in the future.
Thank you, Laura and Monica. Okay, looks like we can maybe move on to the next section on the agenda, the demographic and housing trends.
Sorry.
Yes, Bob.
I thought that we're having questions from committee members, comments from the public, and then discussion among committee members. Is that, am I mistaken about that? Did I miss our discussion? Was that it?
Well, I mean, go ahead and discuss.
Okay,
It didn't
I
seem like there
apologize.
was
In the
people
format
were,
of other meetings, it's usually,
talking, so go ahead,
that?
Bob.
okay. I apologize. In other meetings I'm used to at the town,
think
committee
you're
members have
frozen.
questions. I'm sorry? Can you hear me?
I can, Bob. It looks
Okay,
like
I
Jocelyn
guess
might
Jocelyn's
be.
frozen. Okay.
It looks like Jocelyn might be frozen.
Okay. I understood there's questions, comments from the public, and then discussion among committee members. So I was holding my comments for discussion until now. So let me make them. Apologies for that. The thought-provoking part of this for me was how much there is to learn. And last month, our colleague on the committee, Nicholas Targ, made the excellent point that we don't need to recreate the wheel. We can actually build on the work of others. And I think there's a lot to learn. I think that the job of fulfilling the mandate and checking the box is relatively easy compared to the bigger challenge, which is one I find fascinating and intriguing, and why I'm here, which is take advantage of this opportunity to kind of move beyond the basic requirements. So, for example, one thing that I would benefit from, I expect others on the committee would as well, is to hear directly from someone whose career has been spent in the nonprofit sector developing affordable housing. I've had conversations with such people. It's fascinating how many non-obvious barriers there are. To hear directly from someone like that who could educate us about potential unintended consequences, about barriers to success. So I think this committee should invite such a person. are there other models for developing affordable housing? We heard about 4 in the staff report: ADUs, affiliated housing, inclusionary housing, and town-sponsored housing. What about other models? What about an affordable equity model, which Habitat for Humanity has done with a lot of success, and which I suspect would work well here in Portola Valley? I think we should hear from an expert in that area. We talked briefly about wildfire hazard. If the ADU exclusion zone corresponds to CAL FIRE's very high fire hazard severity zone, then it would represent about 10% of Portola Valley's area. CAL FIRE determined that an additional 50% is at high fire hazard. So together, almost 61% of Portola Valley's area is either high or very high fire hazard, as determined by CAL FIRE over a decade ago. We need to be informed about this. We should hear directly from a fire safety professional. What is their understanding of the fire hazard in this town? What are the current best practices for development? Is it only home hardening and vegetation management, or are there other ways that we should be addressing our fire hazard with municipal planning? And then finally, last month we heard from the chair of the Emergency Preparedness Committee, who described the threat we face as, quote, existential, unquote. We should be informed about what the data and the analysis is that led him to the conclusion that we face an existential wildfire threat, and how that threat should shape what we think about development. What's known about our evacuation capacity? Where can we safely put more houses in terms of that? So my proposal is that we hear from experts in these 4 domains and others. We hear directly. The planning department is doing a ton of work. They're providing great education, but there's no reason we should lean on them for everything when experts can speak to us directly. So I would be interested in hearing how my fellow committee members think about that. Would they be willing to donate 20 minutes of each meeting to hear from someone with professional expertise in these areas? Thank you.
Yes, I would, Bob. This is Sarah Doherty. I fully agree with what you're saying. I would like to hear more from outside experts on the challenges we face as we try and pull this mandate together. Thank you.
Okay, if I could pause this for a moment. Jocelyn is having connectivity issues, so we'll ask Al to step in to chair the meeting from here. So if I could start with a response to a couple of those things, just so that the committee has more context and information. And so there's, like I mentioned earlier in the meeting, there's quite a bit of materials that the town has already prepared related to wildfire safety and the maps and how those apply that have come from the town attorney's office. So we'll supply those to you. I think that's important basis of knowledge. So that's forthcoming. In terms of the models and affordability and the affordable housing providers, this is something that 21 Elements is already working on our behalf of all of the cities. So they're convening a series of meetings to connect the different service providers, the different affordable housing builders, the different for-profit housing builders into like these small group meetings with all of the different cities that staff will be attending. And so we can pull information from those meetings and bring it forward into the committee's discussion. I think we'll have to have a decision probably with the chair and the vice chair about the agendas and how we bring that information into the agendas, because I don't think we'll be able to spend, a really high amount of time on that, but we can figure out the best way to filter that information in and see if there's specific people. Maybe we could have a small subcommittee of this group, meet with some people or do some kind of informational interviews or things like that. So that would be my suggestion as a way to consider it. And then in terms of fire professionals, we do have, as part of our contracts for the housing element and the safety element, we do have fire professionals that are working specifically on our behalf to bring those best practices to the conversation. So that will be happening. And again, we'll have to think about how both our own fire marshal participates in this conversation, or the fire chief perhaps might be the appropriate person. And then thinking about how our consultants weave into that as well. So I think we've got, resources lined up on some of those topics. But we have to think about how to get the information to the committee in the most efficient manner.
Thanks, Laura. So I can't tell if other people have their hands up. Is there an easy way for me to do that, or is that something you can do?
I'm happy to help keep an eye on that, and there are no other hands up at this time.
Okay, well then let's move on to item 3, the demographic and housing trends.
And so this is back to Adrian for the next presentation.
Great, thanks.
Down here. Okay. So thank you, Vice Chair, for that. This next series of slides are meant to flesh out Portola Valley's demographic and housing trends to help further situate the committee so we can better understand the town's housing needs. Now, your packet included a trends report on both San Mateo County and Portola Valley that summarized some interesting trends. So the San Mateo County data provides an interesting contrast with the Portola Valley data because it does drive home how unique this community is. But this presentation will mostly be focused on PV specific data, and it's basically a highly visual add-on to the trends report in your packet. I do want to mention that this data was prepared for us by our housing element consultant 21 Elements, and it's in the initial draft form. So we welcome any feedback on anything that appears unclear or contains errors, and we'll communicate that back to 21 Elements, and we'll get that all fleshed out well in advance of drafting our housing element update. So since the slides will be mostly visual with charts, please don't worry about taking notes or pictures of the presentation, because we are going to post this to the supplemental resources dropdown on the committee page. So it'll be there for you post meeting, so you can have access to it at any time. So we're going to start now with population by age. The distribution of age groups in the city shapes what types of housing the community may need in the near future. An increase in the older population may mean that there's a development need for more senior housing options, while higher numbers of children and young families can point to the need for more family housing options and related services. There has also been a move by many to age in place or downsize to stay within their communities, which can mean more multifamily and accessible units are also needed. So in Portola Valley, the median age in 2000 was 47.2. And by 2019, this figure had increased to around 51 years of age. More specifically, the population of those under 14 has also decreased since 2010, while the 65 and over population has decreased. This chart also shows that there's been an interesting jump in the aged 15 to 24 population. It could be that more college-aged kids are moving home due to affordability constraints. Another noticeable increase is in the age groups of 75 to 84 and the 85 plus category. This could spell an increased need for multi-generational housing in our community. So understanding the racial makeup of a city and region or town is important for designing and implementing effective housing policies and programs. Since 2000, the percentage of residents in Portola Valley identifying as white has decreased. And by the same token, the percentage of residents of all other races and ethnicities has increased by 9.7 percentage points. And that's as of 2019. In absolute terms, the other race or multiple races non-Hispanic population has increased the most, while the white non-Hispanic population has decreased the most. People with disabilities face additional housing challenges. Encompasses a broad group of individuals living with a variety of physical, cognitive, and sensory impairments. Many people with disabilities live on fixed incomes and are in need of specialized care, yet often rely on family members for assistance due to the high cost of that care. When it comes to housing, people with disabilities are not only in need of affordable housing, but accessibly designed housing, which offers greater mobility and opportunity for independence. Unfortunately, this need typically outweighs what is available, particularly in a housing market with such high demand. People with disabilities are at a high risk for housing insecurity, homelessness, and institutionalization, particularly when they lose aging caregivers. This chart shows us the rates at which different disabilities are represented amongst residents of Portola Valley. Overall, 10.2% of people in Portola Valley have a disability of some kind. So there are 1,702 employed residents in Portola Valley, but overall Portola Valley is a net exporter of workers. This figure that we're looking at compares jobs to workers, and it's broken down by different wage groups, offering additional insight into local dynamics. The Portola Valley has more low-wage jobs than low-wage residents, where low-wage refers to jobs paying less than $25,000 a year. At the other end of the wage spectrum, the town has more high-wage residents than high-wage jobs, where high-wage refers to jobs paying more than $75,000 per year. We do see in this figure a strong majority of residents earning $75,000 or more. Those residents work outside of Portola Valley. Now we're moving into Portola Valley's housing stats. So here we see housing tenure showing Portola Valley's renter versus owner occupation in comparison with San Mateo County and the overall Bay Area. The number of residents who own their homes compared to those who rent their homes can help us identify the level of housing insecurity and the ability for individuals to stay in their homes in a given city and region. Generally, renters may be displaced more quickly if prices increase. In Portola Valley, there's a total of 1,685 housing units, and much fewer residents rent than own their homes. 22.6% rent versus 77.4%. And if we compare that with households in San Mateo, we see 39.8% are renters, while 44% of the Bay Area households overall rent their homes. So the age of residents who rent or own their home can also signal the housing challenges that a community is experiencing. Younger households tend to rent and may struggle to rather buy a first home in the Bay Area due to high housing costs. At the same time, senior homeowners seeking to downsize may have limited options in an expensive housing market. In Portola Valley, 0% of households between 25 and 44 are renters, while 26.1% of households over 65 are. Because of increasing housing prices, displacement is a major concern in the Bay Area. Displacement has the most severe impacts on low and moderate income residents. When individuals or families are forced to leave their homes and communities, they also lose their support network. The University of California, Berkeley has mapped out all neighborhoods in the Bay Area, identifying their risks for gentrification. They find that in Portola Valley, 0% of households live in neighborhoods that are susceptible or experiencing displacement, and 0% live in neighborhoods at risk of undergoing gentrification. That said, due to extremely high housing costs, UC Berkeley estimates that 100% of households in Portola Valley live in neighborhoods where low-income households are likely to be excluded due to prohibitive housing costs. So production has not kept up with housing demand for several decades in the Bay Area, as the total number of units built and available has not yet come close to meeting the population and job growth experienced throughout the region. In Portola Valley, the largest proportion of the housing stock was built from 1960 to 1979, with 763 units constructed during that time. Since 2010, 4.4% of the current housing stock was built, which is only 80 units. Portola Valley's older housing stock is interesting data, since it could mean that we'll see more properties demolished, remodeled, additions built on, subdivisions, and continued opportunities for ADU construction. Home prices reflect a complex mix of supply and demand factors, including an area's demographic profile, labor market, prevailing wages, job outlook, coupled with land and construction costs. In the Bay Area, the costs of housing have long been among the highest in the nation. The typical home value in Portola Valley was estimated at 4.1 million by December of 2020 per data from Zillow. The largest proportion of homes were valued from 2 million plus. By comparison, the typical home value is 1.4 million in San Mateo County and 1.07 million in the Bay Area, with the largest share of units valued in the 1 million to 1.5 category. This is in the county, and 500 to 750,000 across the Bay Area. So pretty big contrast there. The region's home values have increased steadily since 2000, besides the decrease during the Great Recession. The rise in home prices has been especially steep since 2012, with the median home value in the Bay Area nearly doubling during this time. Since 2001, the typical home value has increased 184.6% in Portola Valley, from 1.4 million to 4.1 million. This change is significantly higher than the change in San Mateo County and the Bay Area. Similar to home values, rents have also increased dramatically across the Bay Area in recent years. Many renters have been priced out, evicted, or displaced, particularly communities of color. Residents finding themselves in one of these situations may have had to choose between commuting long distances to jobs and schools, or moving out of the region and sometimes out of the state altogether. In Portola Valley, the largest proportion of rental units rented out are in the $3,000 or more category, totaling 49.4%, followed by 15.3% of units that rent for the $1,500 to $2,000 per month category. Looking beyond the town, the largest share of units is in the $3,000 or more category in the county, compared to the $15,000 to $2,000 category for Bay Area as on the whole. When cost-burdened seniors are no longer able to make house payments or pay rents, displacement from their homes can occur, putting further stress on the local rental market or forcing residents out of the community they call home. Understanding how seniors might be cost-burdened is of particular importance due to their special housing needs, particularly for low-income seniors. So in this chart, we see 71.4% of seniors are making less than 30% of the area median income and spending the majority of their income on housing. So that's almost 75 senior community members that are spending much more than the recommended level of their income on housing, and these residents would be considered cost burden. For seniors making more than 100% of the area median income, 94.5% are not cost burden and spend less than 30% of their income on housing. So most seniors in the community are quite secure, but we do see in this data that there are some vulnerable members of the community. So that's the end of my presentation. Again, it's a pretty big data dump, and we're definitely going to be posting this after the meeting so that anybody who wants to take a look, spend some time with the numbers and engage. And once again, I'll just repeat, it is draft format received from our consultants. So if anybody spots any errors or anything that seems strange, please definitely reach out to us and let us know what you've seen and we can talk about it. So thank you.
Thanks, Adrienne. That was some interesting data. I guess at this point, we'll open it up for questions from the committee members. Let's see. So I see Amy, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. I think they're really probably pretty easy ones. One is more of an observation. I think it would be really helpful to be able to look at some of this data relative to, and I know this is there for some of the categories, but not for all, to look at it relative to the past set of data. For example, percentage of renters. I noticed that has, since 2011, that has gone down by about 5%. And I just think it would be helpful if we're going to look at trends, it would be helpful to be able to see that data in the context of where it's been and where it is now, just to see if we can spot trends that might have significance. for us. And then the only other question I think I had was on the chart that measured, I'm just curious, on the chart that measured, I think, disability by category, was that, could an individual be counted twice on that chart, or were they put only in one category?
Right, yeah, so the disabilities were counted separately and
Okay.
are not mutually exclusive, so an individual could report more than one disability.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, Helen?
Hi, Hi, thank you. A couple of questions. In your presentation, I didn't see any single parent data, and I know in the housing element that was considered. As I have 2 single moms who have had to move out of town, I don't know if that was included in displacement. I would just love some single parent data for, to meet our goal of inclusivity, if possible.
I believe so it's an overall data packet, and I was pulling out some interesting, tidbits that seemed applicable for our conversation. And I did observe, I think there was a chart or two that addressed single female led households. So I think we have some data that we could get our hands on. We can look at that.
That'd be great. And then also, the numbers of children, it seemed like if we're going to meet our goal of being family friendly, the number of children, and I realized in the housing element, it's in the 1960s, it talked about how, the graph, it showed how that we were much higher. I wrote it down. Let's see, 1960, under 5, we were at 11%. And then it went down to 2010, 4%. Again, in 1960, we were for 29% for the next age group. And now 2010, it was at 20%. So we've dropped. And so I'm wondering, are we, as we look at eventually at size of bedrooms that we want houses to be available, how many kids, obviously there's a birth decline overall, but I am curious about trying to stay family friendly. So I would love to see that data if possible. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay.
Comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. So Laura, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't see any other questions or any other hands up, but I'm not sure that I'm looking at it quite right.
There are no other committee member hands up.
Okay, all right. And so then at this point, why don't we open it up to the public at large, if they have any questions or comments that they'd like to make.
And we have Judy Murphy.
Okay, go ahead, Judy.
Hi, I just wanted to raise the issue of the data that got shown on age and disabilities. I wonder how much that is skewed by the Sequoias, that because the Sequoias represents a not tiny percentage of our residents, those numbers, in fact, rather than representing unmet needs, in fact, may represent very well met needs by seniors who chose to live in a place that takes care of those things. And I don't know if there's a way to tease that out to see what's in the community versus what's in the Sequoias, but there's possibility we could be led astray by that because of its unique population whose needs are being very well met. Thanks.
That's a good point, Judy. Any other hands up?
Lucy Neely.
Okay, Lucy, go ahead.
Hey there, thank you. Thanks to all of you for being on this committee. Adrian, what was the number that you read for number of jobs in PV?
Let's see here.
I thought it was different than what was in the packet, so I was curious.
I addressed how many employed residents there are in Portola Valley. I didn't cover the number of jobs.
Employed residents. Okay,
Right.
yeah, I think, you know, there's different ways to measure and different things to consider, but when I was reading through the packet, it said, there was something that when I calculated, it said there was like 900 jobs in Portola Valley. And again, I'm not sure exactly how that's calculated, but I just wanted to point out something you're all probably super aware of is that, you know, all the construction workers and the landscapers and the house cleaners and the nannies come into Portola Valley every day and probably make up the largest portion of the workforce that works in Portola Valley are probably not accounted for in a lot of the numbers. It's like people that work at Roberts or the chiropractor or something official. So just to, you know, when we're thinking about people that actually work in Portola Valley, to remember that it's like a lot higher than any official numbers would say. Thanks.
Thanks, Lucy. Okay,
Monica,
I don't think I see any more. Oh, there are more. Okay, so I'm not.
yeah, we have
seeing a
Monica
question.
Cheney next.
Okay, Monica, go ahead.
Hi, sorry to comment so frequently, but question that I think is really important to understand. Let's say that you have a new inclusionary housing project that gets approved, for example, at the Wedge, or let's say you have additional affiliated housing, or that the town develops housing on its property, either as an affiliated housing provider or by doing it as a direct development, I suppose, or under any other of the 5 types of below market rate housing that you can have in terms of your housing element. I would really love to hear a clear articulation from town council about exactly what metrics are used to determine who gets each type of housing. So with ADUs, I think everyone has a very clear understanding that the homeowner determines who lives there. But if you have affiliated housing or inclusionary housing, who exactly gets that housing and what is the exact process for that? And I will follow that up with a, you know, it's clear that a lot of people think that, you know, the person who's working at Roberts or a teacher or a fireman or somebody who's working in Portola Valley is going to get that unit or one of those units. And I'd like to understand really what that process is, because I believe there's a very detailed process involved and that it's perhaps not as one would expect it to be. So I think in light of this discussion for who's living and working in Portola Valley, it would be really helpful to understand who actually gets the units and how that's determined.
Any comment, Laura? Is that something that we will get into more as we talk about this at future meetings?
Yes, we're going to talk about some of that tonight, actually, under the item number 4, the housing affordability income categories. We'll do an overview of that topic that she's asking about.
Okay, great. Any other hands up?
Dana has her hand up.
Okay, Dana, go ahead.
Okay, I would love it for you guys to include the names of the residents who are in the meeting. And that's not showing today. And also in your minutes, if you could also ongoing put in the names of the people who were in your meeting. Okay? You hear me, Al?
Yeah, that sounds fine to
Okay.
me. Is there any reason that we
I think
shouldn't do that, Laura?
It's very important for the community to see who's involved in the.
I agree with you, Dana. And one thing I was wondering, just because the way this shows up, Laura, there's a lot of people that haven't included their last names on the participant list. Do we need everybody to include their last names?
Well, I don't even get that.
Right,
there's
that's a
not-
limitation of Zoom for the meeting format. I mean, we have the same thing on the town council meeting.
And
Yes.
also in your minutes, please include the names of people who were there. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana.
So The council has decided to include the names of people who attend the meeting that are the attendees on the sort of on the side for those of us that are panelists. When you attend as attendee, you can't see those people, so you don't know how many people are in attendance and what their names are. And so the council includes it in the council minutes. We talked about this briefly at the Planning Commission, and the decision at that time was not to include it, but we may take it up at a future time. And so it really is a decision for the committee to make, whether you'd like to see the names of the people that are in the audience, so to speak, in the minutes. We can do that. We should be able to do that from the record. So we just need to know the committee's consensus around doing that. So
My vote would be yes. And I guess my question is, Laura, how do you do that when we don't see somebody's last name? So we see some first names on this list and we don't know who they are really.
it would be up to them, I think, for their Zoom sign-ins to use their full name, because some people have a shortened version, because I wouldn't be able to tell.
Right.
You know, sometimes people are in by shortened names or like a handle, like an internet handle.
So I guess those of you who want to be identified, you just need to put your full name on there. There's a handful here that just have first names.
Okay.
So through the vice chair, we have one more public comment. Do you want to take those, or did you want to go to the committee members? We have 3 committee members with hands up.
Let's go ahead and finish with the public comments, and then we'll hit all of the committee members.
Great. We have Rita Gomez is next.
Okay, Rita, go ahead.
Hi there. I just want to add to what's said already. It would be really great to know actually how many people are in this meeting. And since you're using this particular Zoom format, perhaps one of the people that are acting as host or co-host can then, after their very own name, just in parentheses or a dash or something, just write the number down of how many people. It would be very helpful to the people that are listening and watching this meeting, so that they don't feel that they're just watching it alone, except for who might be commenting. So, you know, Laura or somebody else in the planning department that is the host, co-host, if someone can do that, that would be very helpful. And it would also be helpful in other town meetings too. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Okay, let's bring it back to the committee members. Bob, would you like to start us off with some discussion?
I just wanted to second the requests that were made to include the names of attendees, and I would ask that people include their, their proper names, first and last name, in their Zoom label. So, as a courtesy to others, so we know who's here. That's it. Thanks.
I think that's a good suggestion. Let's see, Andrew.
I'm going to dissent. I don't think we need to know who's here. I don't think people need to identify themselves. I think that's an invasion of their privacy. If somebody wants to watch our meeting and doesn't want to be identified, why should they have to identify themselves? I don't like the idea of the government keeping track of who's coming to these meetings, who's not a member of the committee. I know in this era of electronics, we all sacrifice our privacy, but this seems like if somebody wants to talk, yeah, their name should be known. If somebody just wants to watch, I don't think we should count them, and I don't think we should get their names.
But I mean, if they don't want to be identified, they can just use some alias, right? So it's not particularly complicated for them if they don't want to be identified. I think that if people want to be identified, though, they should use their name.
I have a question related to Brown Act. I mean, isn't that a Brown Act thing that you have to sign in? Amy Armstead,
No.
lawyer.
No, as a matter of fact, the Brown Act makes it, prohibits, as I recall, prohibits the requirement that one give one's name, address, et cetera, any other identification in order to have the right to speak at a public meeting. And I think maybe town council is on this call, and I don't want to step in her shoes, but I mean, that's my recollection from advising the county.
Yes.
that doesn't mean that people should be held back from identifying themselves, and that someone who identifies themselves then becomes part of the record. I'm sorry, Kara, you go ahead.
No, thank you, Amy, for that. You're right that the Brown Act does not require you to identify your name in order to speak. However, in this new age of remote meetings, the Brown Act has not caught up with that privacy issue. And so there is no guidance on whether somebody should be required to list their name or not list their name, et cetera. But I think that what the Brown Act does require is that people not be deterred from attending public meetings and from people don't want their privacy impacted at all. So, you can take into account those considerations when you come up with some kind of policy. Certainly, as one of you mentioned, if somebody does not want to disclose their name, they can either write anonymous or give it an alias. On the other hand, people might call themselves another person, and there's really no quality control there. We can't verify that the person identified is actually that person who has attended. So it's a brave new world with these Zoom meetings.
Okay, well, I would propose that we encourage people to identify themselves, but not require it. And if someone doesn't want to identify themselves, but still wants to speak, they're allowed to.
Al, we
Okay.
have one more attendee with their hand up.
Okay, I don't see it, so
Betsy.
whoever it is, please go ahead.
It's Betsy Morgan-Thaler.
Okay, go ahead, Betsy.
Thank you for letting me speak out of turn, and thank you for the thoughtful conversation. I just would add my own confusion, and I've learned something just now of which I was unaware. My own confusion about self-identification came from attending quite a number of council and other meetings prior to our quarantine chapter, where we were asked to sign the clipboard at the sign-in table in the Red Schoolhouse, providing our name, first, last, email address, and physical address, as well as fill out small white pieces of paper and turn that in to speak. That was the request. And so to learn that was above and beyond is new learning for me. But in the spirit of transparency, for those other members listening and willing to reveal their identity as I am now, I like it very, very much. So thank you for that rural community feeling that we get when we know one another as we pass by. Thanks so much for taking my comment out of turn.
Okay, thank you, Betsy. Okay, are we caught up now on comments and questions? And is there any discussion about this topic that people would like to have before we move on?
Hi, this is Bill Kelly.
Okay.
And I had my hand up, but I have been listening through this, and I guess I just have a general reaction before we get into the question of housing affordability income categories, which is in learning some of the history here and in reading the materials, I think we should not be taking a victory lap based on how wonderful the housing element from 2015 to 22 has been. The view that says we have a lot to be proud of, the evidence for that is we built some ADUs, but we don't really know who lives in them. And we've had a bunch of meetings. That's kind of what we claim. And what was very interesting to hear from Sue and her history in the town is that we have what seems to be a long history of finessing this issue by complying with then current legal requirements and not actually building housing. In the meantime, our community is getting older and richer, and we're not building any housing to speak of here. So if we are going to be building a new element, as we need to, I would not start by saying we've been doing a great job, because I don't think we have been.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? All right. I see on the agenda that it shows a break at this point.
Yeah, I'm sorry, through the vice chair, Nicholas Tarek has his hand up now.
Oh, got it. Sorry, Nicholas, go ahead.
Yeah, so let me just join in to Bill's comment as one of the people who participated in the drafting of the document, which immediately followed the 900 Portola Road conversation that the town was having. We have a very specific task that needs to be fulfilled, and that is to create a housing element that satisfies certain legal requirements of the state. We also have an opportunity to express who we are as a town of Portola Valley. And there are a variety of vehicles through which we can express that, the housing element only being one of them. So when you identify that it's a great success, and the answer is yes, it is a great success. And not only did we create the opportunity, but in fact, the number of houses or number of units was actually achieved, which is a pretty unusual outcome. But if you're saying that more and different could be achieved, then that's also certainly right. And I think that it is a worthwhile task, conversation, to determine what it is that we're actually doing. And if what we're doing is developing a housing element to achieve a specific regulatory outcome, then that's one thing. If we're looking for a broader expression of Portola Valley in terms of housing and the shaping of our community, then I think that that's potentially something else as well. And there are probably a broader range of tools that are available. And I would just posit for the chair and the vice chair and staff that that's probably a useful conversation to have. And it goes back, and I hate to say it, it goes back to the first slide that was on our screen, which was, what are we doing here anyway? And at some point, it's probably worth actually revisiting that if there's interest, and as Bill noted, that maybe we should be doing something in addition or different. So that's my only observation. So Bill, I think the answer is a great success on one hand, and depending on how you frame the question that's trying to be achieved.
Yeah, no, I think there's a difference between a housing element and housing. And if we're really here only focused on a housing element, I may be in the wrong meeting. But that's maybe my mistake.
No, it's a worthwhile conversation. And it's a great comment. It's a great observation. What are we doing? And what are we going to be doing over the next several months together?
Okay, thank you, Nicholas. All right. So as I was saying, the agenda shows a break at this point. I'm not sure what was envisioned. Do people want to take a 5 or 10 minute break, or should we just keep plowing ahead? I'm not exactly sure what was the intention there.
We just wanted to have an opportunity for a break if the committee wished to take it, to take a 5 or 10 minute break. But I mean, we don't have to, it's just up to you.
I mean, I'm happy to keep going, but if there's, some people that would prefer to take a break, then fine.
No, I would keep going.
Me too.
Okay,
with me. It's okay.
all right, great. All right, so then let's move on to item 4, the housing affordability income categories, the deep dive into that. I guess that's Adrian again.
Yeah, Adrian will do most of it and I'll just do a little section in the middle.
Great, thanks a lot, Adrian.
Thank you. Okay. All right, so thank you, Vice Chair. So last month, we had a brief overview of affordability and income levels when it comes to planning for Portola Valley's assigned regional housing needs allocation. In this presentation, I'm going to take a bit of a deeper dive into the income categories to help provide further context to this discussion. So key topics that I'll cover are looking at the meaning of affordability in the context of San Mateo County, income levels and corresponding examples of occupations, and finally, we'll look at the impact of not providing affordable housing in our community for those that need it the most. So again, you've seen this slide before. This is just once again our assigned regional housing needs according to 4 income levels. Very low, low, moderate income units are generally considered more difficult to satisfy. So that'll be one of the committee's challenges as we move forward. So what does affordability mean when we're talking about affordable housing? So we mean housing that is moderately priced for low or moderate income residents so that new families and the workforce can buy or rent in the communities they work in and love. But what exactly does it mean to be affordable, and affordable to whom? To be considered low or moderate income in the Bay Area means a very different thing than in most parts of the country because of the income gap, meaning the difference between the highest and lowest wages is so wide in our region. Affordable housing here can mean that your favorite hairstylist, your child's teacher, or that friendly medical assistant at your doctor's office has access to below market housing so they can live close to their work. So the starting point for this calculation is the area median income, AMI. This is the midpoint household income in a specific region, meaning half of the households make more and half of the households make less. In San Mateo County, the household area median income for a single person is $104,700 per year. So moderate income is 80 to 120% of the AMI, low income is 50 to 80% of the AMI, and very low income is 30 to 50% of the AMI. The rule of thumb generally is that households should reasonably expect to pay about 1/3 or less of their income on housing for their financial situation to be sustainable. So I presented this same slide at our last committee meeting, but here it is again as a refresh, in part because the income levels have been updated by San Mateo County and are a bit higher than previously stated. So I wanted to bring this back to you. So this information right here is the current information. I've also thrown in the extremely low income category this time around as well, just as a reference point. While Portola Valley's RHNA numbers don't break out a required number for the extremely low income category, this does provide good background to understand what this category looks like. So we can see how the affordability levels play out according to household income among households of 1, 2, and 4. So for example, 2 parents raising 2 children earning a combined household income of $90,000 would fall in the very low income category as a family of 4. Another slide you've seen before, and once again, many, if not of all these occupations are represented in the Portola Valley community. This time to help contextualize these income levels, I've included a few realistic examples, or I'll speak to a few realistic examples of how the incomes of those people with these occupations are significantly impacted when it comes to housing affordability. So for example, if a grocery store clerk or a barista is making $15 an hour minimum wage, they're going to make $20,000 a year based on a 40-hour work week. This is considered extremely low income because it is less than 30% of the San Mateo County median income of $104,700. And even with the low assumed cost of, say, a $2,000 per month studio, which is probably not even a reasonable assumption in Portola Valley, this grocery store clerk would be paying more than 80% of their income on housing. Take another example of a preschool worker. Even with an hourly wage of $27 per hour and an annual salary of $52,000 in San Mateo County, these individuals are considered very low income, paying nearly 45% of their income on rent. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura for the next few slides, and then I'll wrap up.
So we understand better, and it takes a couple times really to internalize these income requirements, because it's not that intuitive, certainly at first. So we have these requirements. So now how do we implement that? How do we maintain affordability over time? How do we make sure that these requirements are enforced? So it starts with the municipal code. So we have some language in our existing code, but we will need to add language to that and update it to make it stronger as part of the housing element update process. And the code creates contours of the process. So some of this may be policies that come from the general plan, from the housing element, or it may be based in the code. But it's important to have that framework. And some larger communities that have had more robust affordable housing programs for years already have these municipal code requirements in place. And then important thing to understand is that these units have a deed restriction or similar legal mechanism. So something is recorded on the property that requires these units to be affordable, and the time frame these days is 55 years. So this time frame has gotten longer. And so 55 now is what's in state law for different types of affordable housing. So this has become kind of the industry standard or the best practice. So this does carry forward to future owners of properties. And so the way that we enforce that is through typically a BMR, below market rate housing agreement. So this is like a contract, a legal agreement between typically the developer and the town or the city. And this is the instrument that lays out the details. And so they vary a little bit by different communities. They may have slightly different names or different forms, but the important thing to know is that this is where the details typically are of the levels of affordability, who's going to live there, how they're going to be selected, for how long, and those types of things that go on into the future. There may also be conditions of approval on projects, and that's going to depend on the type of project that's under consideration. But in case you've heard that term in town, when we have an application, for example, that's before the Planning Commission, you may have conditions of approval. So this might be another way that we would maintain affordability requirements going into the future. So next slide, please. So we're going to look at how that may vary for sale or ownership units versus rental, because those can be just a little bit different, some nuance there. So if the units are for sale, then the household must qualify according to their income. And there's different ways that this is done, but it can include income and assets that people have to provide in order to qualify for these units. And the value of that unit doesn't just go up with the market. And so there's an agreement with that homeowner that the sales price is going to be limited. So the owner doesn't capture the increase as it goes up the same way you would with a market unit. And you don't just let the unit go up in value like a market rate unit. That owner doesn't capture all of that increased value, which we know could be $1 million, right? And so there's mechanisms that are in place so that the owner of these units agrees in advance that they're not going to develop this level of equity. So there's resale restrictions that are in place, and usually it'll slowly escalate the price of the unit so that the owner can capture a little bit of the increase in the value. And that may be tied to a measure like consumer price index or something similar. There's different mechanisms that different cities use to be able to limit the increase in the value of those BMR units. So that way that unit remains affordable for the next household. So when you buy a BMR unit, you sign an agreement, you know what you're in for, you know you're not going to capture all the increase in the value. Then when you sell it, you notify the city or whoever is running that program on behalf of the city, and then you sell it under certain restrictions so that it remains affordable for the next household that's going to move into it. So you can imagine that there's benefits of owning a BMR unit in terms of housing security, affordability, and some small increase in the price of home, but it is different than owning a market rate home when you have the potential benefit of capturing that increase in the home price as time goes on. So next slide, please. So rental units are similar, but just a little bit of nuance difference. The households must qualify again for these units, and it includes all members of the household. So you're usually going to see for affordable rental units, they're going to be kind of the households where there's not a lot of people coming and going from them as much. And you're not going to have as many opportunities. People are not going to rent out rooms and chase household size in the same way oftentimes, in my experience. The rental increases are limited. And so whoever is renting the unit must keep those units affordable to those renters according to the formula. And there's process and procedures in order to do that. And this whole process is administered by professionals that understand the requirements and can handle the complexities of, there's confidential information that's involved, you have people's personal information, there's a lot of legal requirements. And so this is a very specialized firm, for a very specialized area. And there's special firms that do this kind of rental housing. So next slide, please. So how are these residents selected? How does that process work? So a lot of places have what's called a local preference program. And so an example may be, bless you, Sue. An example may be getting a small preference in the process for people who either live or work in the community. That's something that we see. But it's important to note that any kind of preference program must comply with fair housing requirements. So you can never put a restriction into a preference program or discriminate against anyone based on any protected classes or any characteristics that fall into those categories. So it's very specific how you can outline that kind of program to make sure that there's not discrimination that's going on along with it. So it's very common for a nonprofit to oversee these kinds of programs. Some of the larger cities also run their own program and qualify residents for BMR projects. It's very common for a wait list to exist in different cities. So a wait list could be just for the city itself. There's some effort going on right now to coordinate and create more of a regional wait list so that people would be able to get housing in maybe a couple of different cities within the region, cities or towns. So what happens sometimes is the city may open a wait list at a set time, like at a certain time per year, to add new people onto the wait list. Or if there's a project coming up that has affordable housing units, you may specifically open the wait list at that time. And what you do is you reach out to the public and you say, we're opening our list. Now is the time to come get onto the wait list. And it's common to wait many years in our area on the peninsula on a BMR wait list to be able to get a unit, because the units have to line up with your household in terms of your income, according to all the affordability categories, and also your household size and the number of bedrooms that are in that unit, and then standards that are in place around adequate size of units for the number of people. So it's a complex formula. So sometimes units, you could be at the top of the list, but the units that become available are not fit to your income or household size. So then you're not eligible for them. And so maybe somebody further down the list will get that unit and you have to continue to wait for another unit that comes up. So there are many cases where people wait a long time. There's some lucky folks because the timing is just right, but it is really common in our area for people to wait a long time for these units to become available. So back to Adrienne for the next slide.
Just a couple more slides here. So why is affordability important? Overall, people are paying too much of their income on housing. There's overcrowding, with people living with more roommates or family members than a home should hold. People are staying in unsafe or unhealthy living conditions because they have no other option. People are also moving further away to places with more affordable rents and home prices, and this is resulting in longer commutes to work. With more workers we depend on moving away due to high costs, we have more traffic. Sometimes the direct and indirect costs of traveling far for work pencil out, and people leave our communities for good, which can have a lot of ripple effects. So lastly, ultimately, this housing element update provides an opportunity to develop policies and programs that respond to all the phases of life our community members experience. Makes it possible for more housing and more diverse housing choices. Your children or grandchildren can stay in the places they grew up in. Young families, single parents, and large families will be able to find starter homes. All the people we depend on in our communities, like teachers, firefighters, healthcare, and essential workers, can live closer to their jobs without long commutes. And those commutes can increase traffic. Older adults can stay in their homes or communities as they age, and community members across all incomes can find housing. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrienne, and thanks, Laura. That was a lot of good information. So at this point, let's open it up to questions from committee members to Laura and Adrienne. So just raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Let's see, I see Bob's got a hand up. You want to go ahead, Bob?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that great presentation. I thought it was very interesting, and I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around certain parts of it. So I'm hoping you'll clarify for me, or maybe someone on the committee who's more sophisticated thinking about economic matters than I am can help me out. But so it's literally a lottery to get in. There's something of a certain economic value, and a lottery gets you in the door, and I guess in the inclusionary housing program that Portola Valley has, the developer sort of takes a hit, if you will. The developer is willing to provide that because they get an economic benefit in the rest of the development, so they're willing to do that. The renter or the new homeowner wins the lottery to get in. If it's a homeowner, then the person who the last owner in the 55-year period, the person who buys at year 50, literally wins the lottery because it becomes market rate. And so I'm trying to track in my mind where the value is going, and I think I understand the beginning because the developer benefits with concessions, but I don't know. It's not a well-posed question, but if you can shed some light on it, anyone, that would be, I appreciate it.
I think one thing I would add is that now that these types of units have been in construction and on the market for quite some time, Palo Alto has been doing it since the early 1970s. A lot has been learned about how to structure BMR agreements and deed restrictions. And so in the modern era, I would not expect the last owner at the end of 55 years to get the windfall. I would expect there to be a legal mechanism to keep that from happening. And if there's residual equity in those units, I would hope that that equity would be reinvested back into new affordable housing, or after 55 years maintenance and, maintaining that affordable housing as safe and as affordable. So I think that last owner does not get the windfall. I think in the past that could have been true, but I think that this field has changed a lot in the last 15 to 20 years.
What you're describing is my understanding of how Habitat for Humanity operates, which is why I'm so intrigued about their model and learning more. But can you give a specific example where how that equity transition would help it or would work if it's a for-profit developer, not a nonprofit? And maybe too detailed for right now, which is fine, but I'm just curious if you can clarify how that would work.
It's pretty different. Okay, so Habitat has its own model, and part of the model of Habitat is for people to be able to develop equity and to use that for growing their wealth and their ability to, change their family outcomes. So that has a specific
And I understand it
mission.
goes back to Habitat. They're a nonprofit. That's separate. It's less obvious to me in the for-profit case how that works.
So in the for-profit case, you're saying in like an ownership, so someone buys a condo and then at the end of 55 years, that condo has been bought and sold to lots of different residents consistent with the deed restrictions for that city or town. And then at the end, if that condo is at its, at the end of the deed restriction, sometimes the city will go back and, because there'd usually be a right of first refusal. So sometimes the city will go back and buy that unit itself. So some cities do that in order to assess it. Sometimes you would do upgrades to it and resell it into a program. Sometimes a nonprofit will do that on behalf of a city. So there's a lot of emphasis and there's different mechanisms that you can use to reinvest in that unit and make it affordable, keep making it affordable into the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, Amy.
Sorry, actually, I was actually going to just offer what my experience has been, and it tracks with what Laura just said. So there are ways of building that into the restriction, the deed restriction itself, that protect that investment.
Great, thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, since I was on some committees in Palo Alto, we had a lot of trouble with buildings that were aged, and the below market rate owners were being asked to pay for a new roof or sometimes very massive construction, and they had low income and no equity. And so getting into those BMR units is like the worst thing they ever did. It's much more beneficial to be in a rental unit under those circumstances than it is to be in an equity unit. I think the equity units seem like, on the surface, a great idea, but if you're not giving the people the actual equity and they don't have control because it's a multi-unit building, it's not quite as utopian as it might seem. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah,
Okay.
through the chair, if you don't mind, I really agree with you, Andrew. I happened to do work in Palo Alto more than 10 years ago when they were evaluating their BMR housing program. And I actually am the one that wrote the survey and sent it to all the owners and tabulated the results. And the results were very split. Some people said it was the best thing that ever happened to them because they had secure, safe housing in Palo Alto all those years. And then some people said it was the worst financial decision they ever made because they were almost able to buy a market rate unit. And so in the professionals that I talk with these days, when we're talking about BMR ownership units, we're trying to be much more transparent with households and help them to understand the decision they're making. And if they can almost afford a market rate unit someplace else, sometimes that's the best financial choice for them. But some people just want to stay in their community, which they love, and they're willing to forego the financial benefit. So your point is very well taken, and I think is a very important part of crafting a BMR program that is transparent and actually helpful to people.
Okay, let's see. I don't see any other hands from the committee members. How about from the attendees? Oh, sorry, Sarah, go ahead. I think you're muted. Sarah, I think you're muted.
Super sorry. Going back to kind of where we started and trying to clarify kind of the challenge or goals of this committee, I guess, Laura, do you foresee as part of this, us coming up with a BMR, how did you just phrase that? A BMR, policy or what have you? I mean, that seems a step further than what the goal of this group is.
Yes, it's a step further. Okay,
Just wanted
so
to clarify for those who are listening and those who are on the committee. I mean, I think it's all good for us to get educated on this, but reining it back in, our role through this process is really to enable, zoning more or less that will allow for, the RENA numbers.
So we're gonna have to make some assumptions, this committee will, as part of our process, about having, if we're gonna have, I'll just make something up. I'll use an example. Let's say that we decide that we are gonna have some zoning that allows some multifamily housing. And then we know that we're gonna have to have an inclusionary requirement as part of that. So we probably, if this committee would need to reach that point of we're going to have an inclusionary housing program, we anticipate this kind of density or intensity of development, and we need enough details to be able to analyze it and present and figure out how many units we project at the different income categories. But we would not get into the very fine details. The fine details would be a program, capital P, of the housing element. So this committee would recommend that we have a program that says we develop the fine details. So that might be an example of how this plays out.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, do you see any attendees that have questions, Laura?
We do. Rita Gomez is first.
Okay, go ahead, Rita.
Thank you. Can someone tell me how many attendees are on this Zoom call? If I was at the town schoolhouse, I would be able to see how many people were in the room, and I hope in October that we're all able to meet in the schoolhouse. But how many are actually on?
18.
Thank you. And a good example of these type of projects, you can review council houses in England, what happened with those programs, the good and the bad. And do we have any below market rate units currently in Portola Valley? And how is that monitored or organized?
The only affordable units that we have that have either kind of like a legal mechanism to make sure that they stay affordable are at the Priory. And at the Priory, it's written into their conditional use permit. And so most of their units end up being affordable because they're for their staff, but only, I believe, we'd have to check, I believe only 2 would qualify as a deed restricted BMR unit that has to be available for certain income levels.
How, I guess the second part is, how about with ADUs that people, when they build their homes and they build an ADU or a cottage on their property, and the county sends a note saying, are you going to be offering this? Will you put this in the program? And will you offer this at low market? How much of that do we have in Portola Valley?
I'm actually not familiar with the program you're talking about where the county sends something. I'm not familiar with that.
Yes, there is such a program that you receive a letter, a new homeowner that has a cottage or something on their property, and maybe the town attorney knows about this, but that would be something to follow up on. How many of those units people have put into the program, and what are they affordable housing? Thank you.
Thanks, Rita.
Next is Betsy Morgan Thaler.
Okay, Betsy, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I unmuted Monica Cheney instead. So sorry about that. It's Monica.
Okay, Monica.
Okay, it's Monica Cheney. Thanks for that, Laura. It was helpful to hear your explication on that topic. I still have sort of a question, because I think that there is still a popular sense that having more below market rate housing in Portola Valley would provide more housing for people working in Portola Valley already, or who have been living there and are sort of having challenges from an income standpoint and would like to remain in Portola Valley. And yet, as I understand it, legally speaking, there are serious issues with local control type restrictions. And in particular, I think we should be actually talking about that program. I just would put a vote in for having a very clear understanding of how we would assemble any kind of below market rate housing agreements. I'm very concerned that people are going to have very different values on whom to sort of have as a priority in the whether it's a rental or a purchased unit. Just to be super clear, I'll put my finger on it in a way that might be a bit controversial, but we know a lot of people know people in town who they would love to see have a unit, and yet there may be very compelling stories from people who live 2 hours away, who may be of a different race, for example, that is underrepresented in Portola Valley, who we think would be deserving. And so I feel like this is a sort of fraught topic, but it's one that should be addressed. I mean, I don't feel like it's appropriate to kind of kick that can down the road and then have an inclusionary housing project that gets approved, because once we do it in one site, we're going to be essentially required to do it in another site. And to get to 253 units potentially of multifamily housing zoning, there's going to be a lot of this. And so I do think it's actually a really important topic to have some agreement on. I feel like it's a bit fraught to sort of go out into the wilderness of sort of opening Pandora's box without understanding exactly what we're getting into there.
And Monica, we're just at 2 minutes. Oh, perfect.
Okay, thank you, Monica.
Now we have Betsy Taylor.
Okay, all right, Betsy.
Hi, thanks. It was a really interesting presentation, and I too want to go to our goals and how we achieve them. So what tools do we have to achieve those goals? I was very interested, Laura, that you had studied in Palo Alto, and I think it would be wonderful to read that study of 10 years ago. It might well serve us today, a decade later. But as I understood it, the below market rate breaking point for developers being willing to fund this below market rate housing for us is in exchange for developing 85% of high income housing. My question really is, since that is arrived at by the developers, have we tested whether or not that ratio works in the long term? Could we be creating a larger problem for ourselves, that the needs of the 85% are greater than the 15% can fulfill, if you get the drift of my question, because it is developer driven, not driven from the needs of the community? Was that part of your study? And is anyone in California, 21 Elements or otherwise, looking at it from that perspective? Because we do want to better the community through diversity and individual lives, not place a greater burden by getting that ratio wrong.
Thanks, Betsy. Is there any comment, Laura, on where that ratio comes from?
I can try to speak to that. It's a complicated topic, but 15% is a pretty common number that's been in place in a lot of communities around us for maybe the last decade or so. Is pretty common. There's at least 3 of you in the group that probably know something about this also. So see if you agree with that. There are some communities with higher percentages. There's, originally there wasn't a ton of economic analysis around this, in my observation, but there has been a lot more economic analysis around these policies in recent times, and some of the modeling has gotten really sophisticated. It's still modeling, it's still based on assumptions. But for us here in Portola Valley, there is some modeling that's been done on our behalf through 21 Elements that we'll be bringing forward to you. And it's, it will help to provide some context around this and understanding how some of the market forces work. It's not all specifically around inclusionary housing or the 15% or the 85%. But I think that for communities around us in general, the opportunity for developers to build the market rate housing at, let's say, the 85% has been enough to subsidize the BMR units. And so projects have been built. Now there's exceptions to that. There's places where the economics haven't worked out or the specific rules haven't worked out the way that people expected. But we can see a lot of the development around us on the peninsula does have an inclusionary requirement, and it did pencil out, so to speak, from an economic point of view. And so, yes, mistakes can be made, and cities that have made mistakes in the past have come back and corrected that and learned from those mistakes. And it's not uncommon that you would have to do a revision to your inclusionary housing policies after you've seen them implemented for a while, or if the economics of the situation change.
Okay, thanks.
Through the chair, if I could just add a little bit to that. There was a recent law that was passed that really memorialized the fact that 15% is the standard. And
Okay.
under this law, actually, if a city wanted to impose an inclusionary requirement above 15%, the city had to do is required to do additional economic analysis and have that additional inclusionary percentage approved by the state. So it is at this point a pretty well accepted ratio.
Okay, thanks, Cara. That's helpful. Okay, other comments from the public?
Vice Chair's discretion, Betsy has her hand up again. Would you like to give her another chance to speak, or?
Yes, yeah, let's give her another chance to speak. Go ahead, Betsy.
Thank you for your comments. And just very quickly, I just want to dog-ear this question because I agree with Cara, that it is the standard. 15% is the standard. I did work with a developer, not for pay, but because we ended up in a partnership thing together. And I know from that one experience, it's developer driven. It's the point at which developers can't make a profit on the rest of, they're not there for our benefit. They are there to make a profit. And that's the breaking point, and that's how it became the standard. What I haven't heard is a thoughtful evaluation on the part of communities that it actually serves the community in the long term, that we aren't creating more problem by not bringing in complementary outside funds, federal funds, or some kind of a funded mandate to complement that so that we can arrive at a number. And I wouldn't know what it was because we haven't done the study. I'm just throwing that out there because it's not just us, it's the entire state that's going down this road. And so more thought needs to be put into it, I believe. Thank you so much for taking my second round of comments.
Okay, thank you, Betsy. Okay, let's open it up to committee members for any discussion that they'd like to have on this topic.
I'm sorry. Monica has her hand up again.
Okay, let's let Monica have another go at it.
Hi, since we get to make a second comment, I just very quickly wanted to say a little bit to Bill Kelly's point earlier, and I think Bob Turcotte's, that if this question is a little, and Nicholas Targ as well, we're here talking about how you comply with your legal requirement under the ABAG RHNA numbers, but there's a really bigger question and opportunity. If Portola Valley is a very generous place, if people want to provide those who work in town or some metric that seems right, a better way to have housing, I think there is a solution to that, which is a very free market solution, which is simply to create a fund for those who, for example, Bill Lane had set this up for the teachers in our school, a housing fund, and to provide additional funds to those who, would be sort of income qualified, whatever metrics we wanted to use. There are other solutions outside of this discussion. I just wanted to put in a plug for that because it has been done before, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you, Monica. Okay, Helen, I see you have your hand up.
I just had a quick comment about the capital stack that affordable developers use, and that they you know, these tax sorry, my son.
Hello.
These capital stacks that the tax rebates, I'm sorry, I'm just going blank now because I'm being distracted. But the tax the tax credits, sorry, thank you. Thank you, Laura. The tax credits that these companies locally can apply for and lower their overall tax bill are very popular. Although the prices have changed because of the Trump administration tax law changes. So I just wanted to comment on that. Like, those tax credits have been very popular, but the prices of them do change, and they went down under the Trump administration tax code changes. So, but they are popular, and that's off, you know, that is one tool that they use in a capital stack to build affordable housing. So, but to build a capital stack is very complicated for these affordable housing units. So thanks. Sorry about being distracted right as my son.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Okay, would anyone else like to make a comment? Go ahead, Bob.
I want to sort of applaud the people that are calling in and reiterate my call for us to boldly extend to 3 minutes. I think we're getting a lot of really great comments, and if 10 people call and we go from 2 to 3 minutes, that will add 10 minutes to our 3.5-hour meeting. So I think it's a small price to pay. The inclusionary housing approach, I thought the comments were very interesting. This as is a lot of this is new to me, and so I'm still forming my opinions about it. But if there are no other constraints, that seems like a great approach. A free market approach, essentially, to provide affordable housing. But of course, the problem is there are other constraints. And, you know, I'll probably quit hounding on this issue once we actually hear from our emergency preparedness chair. But evacuation is an issue. Wildfire hazard is an issue. And so it's a little bit of a Faustian bargain, it seems to me, my intuition is anyway, where to provide one affordable housing unit, we also add 6 market rate units. Wouldn't be a problem if we could evacuate in less than 2 hours, but or in less than 12 hours, but we don't know that yet. And so that's, you know, it's not a well-developed thought, but that's a concern I had, and I would love to hear what other people's thoughts are about that trade-off.
Okay, that's a good comment. Have we got anyone else that'd like to make a comment?
I have a question at the risk of sounding naive. So what is happening, say, in a community like Paradise that was affected by all those fires so tragically? What kind of requirements are being placed on a community like that to have, you know, increased housing opportunities to people? And I'm sorry if that's super naive, but, you know, in line with Bob's questions around evacuation and fire safety and all the rest of it, how are these problems being resolved in other towns that are in, you know, WUI situations like ours?
It's a very smart question, I think. My understanding is that they still have arena allocation, but we're learning more about that. We actually have the same consultants that Paradise has. Our housing element and safety consultants are the same consultants they are using. And our fire safety consultant is the same consultant that they're using. So we're trying to learn from these other communities and bring some of those practices into the fold. We also have an evacuation study that's going forward with a leading transportation firm. So we do have a lot of work around these issues that is either started or about to start in these different categories. But communities still have to plan for additional housing, even if they have wildfire risk. And the amount that allocation has been adjusted for that has been complex and confusing in terms of how it has reached all of us and the understanding of that in terms of how the process worked through the state and through ABAG and how our allocation came to us. So I understand that there's a lot of, it's been challenging. So staff has done a lot of work in terms of tracking that. And I know a lot of residents have been really interested and involved in that too. But we could certainly, try to, if you've got specific questions on how that's working in some other communities, we can work through our network and our consultants to get those specific answers. But the general answer is everyone is planning for their RHNA one way or another.
Okay, thanks, Laura.
I think the larger, I think my point may have been lost, and that is, again, the 85-15 ratio for inclusionary housing means that for one affordable housing unit, 16 market rate housing units are being built. And since we are in a high fire hazard community, we don't yet know what our evacuation capacity is, how long it will take. This is really something we should be thoughtful about. That's a point I was trying to make. And I think Sarah raises a great question. How do communities that have been through the trauma of having the entire community wiped out by wildfire, how do they approach it? Are they embracing National Fire Protection Association standards? Are they complying with FEMA recommendations? The Governor's Office of Research and Planning. These are all there are known approaches that can be embraced. But certainly one of them is we should think carefully about the safest way to achieve our RHNA numbers. I don't think anyone here is questioning whether we should satisfy that requirement.
Okay. Jeff, go ahead.
Two things. Just to answer Sarah's question, I actually looked this up a while ago. Paradise is being asked to build back all the houses that were lost in the fire, which I think is in the order of 5,800, and to plan for approximately 6% growth of the community. So they basically got their current, the obligation that was handed down to them in their county, which I'm forgetting the name of the county, was basically build back everything that was lost and also plan for 6% growth, which was exactly in line with all the other cities in that county, like maybe Lake County, sorry.
I think it might be Butte County, but yeah.
Yeah, whichever county it has a slightly lower growth rate than San Mateo County, but they were basically treated the same as every other community in Butte County. The other one on the inclusionary housing is, it is applying, it typically applies to subdivisions. So if somebody's creating a subdivision that creates more than 7 houses, the options are do we get, 1 unit per 6 houses or do we get 0? I always question, I'm going to question the wisdom of every subdivision, but if there is going to be a subdivision, I do think we should be looking for some, I think more affordable units is better for the community in general than none. So my 2 cents on that. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. All right. Let's see. Do we have other people that want to make a comment? I don't see any other comments. So why don't we wrap up that topic and then move on to item 5, staff updates and announcements.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we wanted to just do a little bit of a look ahead. We've talked about it a lot tonight. We've actually covered, through all of your questions, we've kind of previewed some of the things that we've got coming up. But over the next couple of months, we anticipate talking in more detail about ADUs, about sites, what are appropriate housing sites in the community, about affiliated housing. And then we're working with the consultants to be pulling in the information that we need to kind of ground all of that with the safety data and information. So that is kind of the look ahead for those topics. And so in terms of the schedule in general, we've got through the end of this year working on those approaches to be able to create the plan for that number of units to meet the RENA requirement. So that kind of happens throughout the end of this year. And then into early next year, we go into more of the programs portion of the housing element and implementing some of those concepts. And then looking further ahead, kind of in the springtime is when we start talking about a full draft of the housing element. And then we kind of go forward from there. So that gives you a sense of what work we've got upcoming. Staff is working on coordinating a community-wide meeting. So we're working on the date for that. So it would be an opportunity for the community to provide early feedback into this process that this committee would have a chance to consider. We're also working on the possibility of a joint council planning commission meeting to receive feedback from both of those bodies. And then we're thinking about this committee would also be invited to that joint council and planning commission meeting. So this is our kind of working proposal at this time. So you could hear some direct feedback from council and from planning commission. So that's our idea. We're working on the details of that and more will be forthcoming. So keep an eye on your email as we're reaching out to you for scheduling and coordination and those types of things. We are also working on some ideas around, or thinking of kind of like training sessions, basic training kinds of things. Some of you are coming in with a lot of experience and some of you are coming in with a lot less. And so we're thinking about having opportunity for you, a couple of you at a time to meet with staff, with Adrian and myself, so that you can ask some specific questions and go over some basic concepts and make sure you feel like you have the foundation of some of the terminology and the language and things that we're talking about, because we recognize it's really a lot of jargon. It's a really specialized field. So look out in your email for that. Those will just be very small group meetings, not Brown Act, just informal chance to ask questions. And then members of the public, if you also have those kinds of general questions, you can direct those to us at housing@portolavalley.net. And we'll start to work up like questions and answers, frequently asked questions as we continue to move through this material and information. We're also updating the committee page. So if you haven't been there on the website, you might want to start checking that out. And so we're adding resource information for the committee and for the public to be able to follow all of this. So there's a couple things you requested at the last meeting that are posted there, additional reading materials, follow-up. So that's the place to go for that. So on the town's website, go to the committee pages, go to the page for this, and there's a little widget with expandable menus. Stuff will be there. When it starts to be too much, we'll figure out how to reorganize it, but that will get you started. The Zoom recordings are also there, so everybody can watch this back. And then we'll probably have more reading for you. So at this point, we would, hopefully everyone has read the housing element that's on the website on the general plan page. If you hadn't, and it's linked to the packet you got for this meeting. If you haven't done that, please do that on the double. And then as your time allows, really get into the general plan in general. Read the introductory chapters, get some context so that you can understand how these things fit together. So please be working on that in your own time as we work towards the next meeting. And everybody, we already met our new member, Andrew, from the Race and Equity Committee. So that now should be a settled thing. We had a change in that from the last meeting. And we also already mentioned that SB9 information will be forthcoming. So in general, what we'll do is when we have more information for you, it'll probably be via email. Well, we'll email you and let you know that either information will be attached or linked, but it'll often be a notification that those things are posted to the website so that the public can track it with us and be reading all of those materials as well. So that is kind of the overview, the updates, and kind of look ahead. We're working on more calendar materials, but we're still getting information in from our consultants and trying to time up some of these things. And so when we have a little bit more information on some of the calendar than what I just went over in the general sense, then we'll provide that to the committee and to the public so everyone can be tracking the process. So that's our staff update, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Laura. That sounds great. Let's see. Okay, I see Bob's got a hand up, so let's go ahead and start with him, and then we'll see if other people have questions.
Thanks for that presentation. That was really helpful and addressed a lot of questions I was carrying around. I was wondering, you mentioned putting a calendar together. I was going to, encourage you to please do that, even if it's in very rough draft form and is dynamic and changing, because I'm a visual kind of guy, and the list that you just gave is not very sticky. But if you could chart it out and put it into supplemental resources, that would be very helpful to sort of anticipate what's coming. Thanks.
Okay, great. Let's see. I don't see anybody else with a question. So shall we move on to the last item on the agenda, the ad hoc housing element meeting of 8/16/21? And does anybody have any comments on the minutes from that meeting? And if no one has comments, would anybody like to make a motion to approve those minutes?
Move to approve.
Through the vice chair, I just want to make sure the public knows that if there's any public comments on the minutes, we should take those as well.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, if there's anyone in the public that would like to comment on the minutes from August 16th, please raise your hand.
Okay, I don't see any. So for the record, we had a motion, Bill Kelly, in a second, Ann Koff-Sill. Is that correct? Did we get that right?
That's right.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, aye. Anyone opposed? Okay. I can't really tell what, I don't see anyone that's opposed, but I'm not sure I'm seeing everybody.
I'm seeing everybody, I believe, and I do not see any indication of opposition to the motion.
Okay, great. Well, then the motion has passed and the minutes are approved. With that, I'd like to adjourn the meeting and thank everyone for hanging in there. I thought it was quite a good meeting. A lot of very good discussion and points raised.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Laura and Adrian. Good job with this.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.